So this session is pasture plant identification and interpretation for healthy soil and quality feed. Our presenter tonight is Lisa McCrory. A healthy, diverse pasture stand can consist of over 20 different plant species, each playing an important role in a dynamic pasture sward. We are going to learn to identify some of the more common, desirable pasture plants, grasses, legumes, forbs, and some undesirable ones too. We'll deepen our understanding of what these plants are, telling us about our pasture. Lisa McCrory is an organic regenerative farmer at Earthwise Farm and Forest and a grazing and whole farm planning consultant. She is also an artist. Before we get started, I wanted to thank our sponsors. We have quite a few this year, and we're really grateful that our sponsors stuck with us with the change to a virtual format. So if you're able, please check them out. There are links to their web pages through the interactive program book and also on our website. So please visit them and let them know we're grateful for their support. We are presenting, attending, and hosting this workshop from land that was managed and inhabited before European colonization. I am hosting from central Massachusetts in the middle of the Nipmuc Nation. So if you'd like to take a look and see where you might be right now, you can do that or check it out later. The link is right there. This session does qualify for continuing education units. So if you're interested and you're a certified crop specialist, you can scan this QR code or I can send it to you after the fact for credit for attending.
Well, hi, everybody. I'm happy to be here and to be talking about pasture plant identification and interpretation for healthy soil. I really wish we were doing this in person because it's so nice to be out in the pasture and engaging with the plants. But we're going to do what we can with what we've got, and I've got a lot of good pictures, and I invite people to ask questions as we go along relative to what we're talking about. Because some of the pictures might stir up a question and I'd hate to have that lost on the way. So whether you ask a question out loud or send a text and those questions can come to me, I'm very flexible. So a little bit about myself. I have a diversified organic farm in Bethel, Vermont called Earthwise Farm and Forest, where we raise a lot of grass-fed livestock, from poultry to cows to some beef, horses, pigs, and turkeys. And we have a few other types of livestock, ducks, some farm dogs that protect our livestock from predators. And we also have about an acre of vegetables that we grow as well. And oftentimes those various, our vegetable crops and our pasture and our livestock are rotated around in a way to create a regenerative farm where, you know, we're creating an edible landscape on our little homestead plot. So we're having a lot of fun there. And I also teach classes on our farm as well. One of them being a grazing management class I do a couple times a year. And what we do when we go out is we talk about rotational grazing and what that means. But we do a lot of plant identification. So I'm hoping these pictures will help us to identify things, and I'll cover some key points to look at certain physical characteristics of plants to help you along. Okay, this is a nice picture of a nice diversified pasture sward that has a lot of different desirable plant species in it that our animals would either love to eat. We've got their first, second, third, fourth, and fifth choices in there, and then some. And that beautiful mixture of pasture provides a wonderful ration for our animals, a nice diverse blend of high protein feeds to high energy feeds to at a stage where they're very digestible and in a very a juvenile state mostly. And we want that when we're grazing our animals if we're looking for ideal gain and productivity and health from most of the livestock species that we put out on pasture. So when our plants are in a juvenile stage, it's kind of hard to identify them. We're not looking at seed heads. We're looking at whether it's a bunch type grass or a sod. We're looking at the leaf structure. We're looking at the stem. We're looking at other physical characteristics of the plants before they start to produce seed. So I'm hoping that this is going to help you as you look out on your pastures after this class and start to appreciate some of the plants that you do have, and maybe have a game plan for how to get rid of some of the plants that you would rather not have in your pastures. When I put, these aren't my cows, but we do have cows on our place. And we also, like I said, we graze our poultry and our horses, our oxen, our pigs. And we have different standards when we put them out on pasture. But I do love to, when I see an animal go out to graze, for my milk cows, I want to see them consuming 50 to 60 bites per minute. And in order for that to happen, those plants need to be tender and still full of a lot of water, not over mature. So these guys are in a really beautiful pasture. The height is great. It looks like it's about an average of 12 inches or so. And that's what I shoot for myself. But sometimes the height of your pasture is going to be relative to how healthy your soil is too. Because a healthy, robust plant is going to have a lot of growth and hold a lot of nutrients and a lot of water, versus a stressed plant of the same species could be much shorter and much more fibrous and less palatable. So our plants are going to be talking to us. They're going to be telling us whether they like the conditions that they're in or whether they need something more nutritious within the soil profile for them to do a better job. So we'll be looking at that as well. So some of the definition is hidden by my screen here, but just some quick identifications of the typical types of forages that you're going to find in your pasture. You're going to have a variety of different grasses. And in the Northeast, most of our native grasses are cool season grasses, or all of them are, unless we're going to add some warm season grasses or annuals into the mix on our own. But your native pasture mix tends to be cool season grasses, and we're going to have legumes. We've got a few types of legumes that are in our pastures, which offer lots of good protein and minerals, and that mixed with an energy-based pasture grass is going to create a ration that's going to be really ideal for your livestock. Forbs are anything that's not are all the other plants that are not considered legume or grasses. And I love having various forbs in my pasture. They contribute a lot to, you have your deep rooted plants such as dandelion, which are going to mine minerals from deeper into your soil profile. You're going to have some other really palatable plants that I like in my pasture, such as plantain. And we'll look at some of those pictures as well. But having like I said, 20 plant species or more within your pasture profile is something to shoot for. With a nice blend of all different types of plants, you're going to provide a nice, healthy ration of feed for your animals, where the nutrients are being drawn up from the soil from various depths. And you're creating, if you look at the profile of our soil, you might have plants that are in your pasture that have roots that are going, a foot to 2 feet, maybe 3 feet down into the ground. And they're drawing up moisture, they're drawing up nutrients, they're feeding microbes in the soil, they're creating a nutrient cycle that can be very dynamic. So first we're going to look at our typical forage grasses. Some of your common cool season grasses you're going to see in your pastures are going to include perennial rye grass, Kentucky bluegrass, to name a couple. There's also warm season grasses that people might want to introduce to extend the grazing season later on. Could be varieties such as your Bermuda grass or your tall fescue. And those warm season grasses are much more tolerant of our hot, dry weather in, like say now, this time of year. And if you're in any condition like we are in Vermont, we are in the midst of a drought. So our plants are a little bit stressed. It's affecting our growing season. It's affecting our pasture yield. But the healthier your pasture is, and the more you effectively manage it with a good grazing system, providing adequate rest to your plants in between each harvest, the better they're going to survive these drought conditions that we're experiencing. And the more resilient they're going to be as years go on with your grazing management. So let's look at some of these forage grasses. Well, we're going to look first at the anatomy of a forage grass. So you've got, and knowing, being able to identify these various parts of your grasses are going to help you determine the type of grass that it is. And you're going to know more about the plant based on the environment that it likes to grow in. We have grasses that are bunch grasses, that are sod grasses, that reproduce primarily by seed. Others reproduce primarily by stolons or a combination of the two. But this diagram is really nice. You can see pieces like the leaf blade. There's going to be some things you're going to be able to look at to differentiate one grass from another just by looking at the blade. There's also a common characteristic to look for is your ligule and the sheath within your plant. Those are really strong indicators of different varieties of grasses. And you've also, the nodes are also good indicators, but also the seed head. We are going to have pasture plants that are going to go to seed, and that'll be your real tell as you're going along. So all of these pieces of the anatomy of a plant, we're going to be looking at as we look at our various grass species. And here we go. So I want to give credit to these visuals that I've got here. Sid Bosworth, who is an agronomist at the University of Vermont. I think he just recently retired, but he put together these PDFs that I'm sharing with everybody today. And I really love to use this when I'm going to people's farms and looking at pastures, because this gives us a lot of the key characteristics of the various plant species that we're going to see in a lot of our pastures. So the first grass that we have here is the Kentucky bluegrass. And we're looking at you see a little bit of the rhizomes from which it spreads. The Kentucky bluegrass is commonly found in our lawns. You'll see them in golf courses. It's a sod forming grass. It is also known as June grass. It tends to be a plant that can go to seed in June, and thus it's got its name that way. If you look at the narrow leaves of the plant, the picture furthest to the right, you can see that if you turn the leaf blade to the side, it almost looks like a boat or a canoe. So those are the things that I kind of look at when I'm looking at my Kentucky bluegrass. But I'm going to find this forage in most pastures. I would be surprised if I didn't see it in a pasture that has been grazed for a number of years. If it's a new pasture that was a hayfield first, I would still expect to see some Kentucky bluegrass in there. It's very common. It's a great forage to have. It's very palatable. And hopefully you guys can all recognize it from some of these pictures, but I can also share some resources if people want more detailed ways to look at these plant species after this presentation. So the annual bluegrass and the rough stock bluegrass, I'm not as familiar with but they look very similar to the Kentucky bluegrass. Looking down at orchard grass is another pasture grass that I see in many pastures. And this one is a bunch type grass. It tends to survive grazing. It actually likes to be grazed. And it also has kind of with its bunch type characteristics, it tends to regrow rapidly after grazing, sometimes faster than the other plants around it. So you want orchard grass standing out in your pasture being, 4 to 6 inches taller than the rest of the plants once you've gotten into your second or third grazing. And you'll look at, the seed head is a great thing to look at, but like I said, we're oftentimes trying to identify these plants before they go to seed. So another indicator for me that I really like to identify my orchard grass is how the leaves are strongly folded. They're flat almost when you see them coming out at first as a juvenile plant. So again, if there's any questions about these as we go along, please go ahead and interrupt. So we're looking now at a couple different kinds of fescue, your tall fescue and your meadow fescue. And some of the characteristics that I like to look at here is if I'm not looking at the seed head, I'm looking at the auricle, and the short auricle usually with hairs or a short truncated ligule. So you've got these characteristics to look for as you're looking up and down the blade of your fescue. And I also find fescue to be kind of coarse in its texture, so that can stand out as well. It's not as palatable as other forage grasses, but it does do very well in pasture. It can sometimes outcompete some things. So I'm kind of hot and cold with this type of forage. The perennial rye grass I absolutely love. It's a forage that animals can really produce well on. Very palatable. They love it. The Italian ryegrass as well is another ryegrass variety that I really like. And the way those grasses stand out, these are bunch type grasses. I believe they are. But the thing that really stands out to me when I see them growing is how shiny the leaf is. And they're very tender. Again, palatability oftentimes correlates with how tender and easy it is to grab that grass and break it off. You try to mimic how an animal might graze by just grabbing the blade and pulling it with your hand to grab a handful of grass. And the ryegrass and the Kentucky bluegrass and the orchard grass, when they're just, before they go to seed, when they're still vegetative, they're nice and tender. And this is where the fescue sometimes is a bit coarse, can almost feel like it's cutting your hand a little bit, is the difference in how they feel. Go to the next, I have a couple more grass pages here. Timothy is I love Timothy, but you're gonna find Timothy mostly in your hay fields. You're not gonna find a lot of Timothy surviving in a well-managed pasture because it can't withstand that constant grazing that it goes through. It just doesn't thrive in those conditions. Timothy itself is a very palatable plant. It's great in your hay fields. It makes a good hay crop, and it's definitely sweet. But like I said, when you start doing some intensive grazing in your pastures, you might not see as much of that Timothy as you go along. And then we have our meadow foxtail. You're going to see some of that. That's kind of a not as common in a well-managed pasture, but you'll find it definitely in pastures that are just getting turned into a rotational grazing system. Again, I don't usually see a lot of those in pastures. Now, but the reed canary grass is definitely a plant species that many people love. They're either going to love it or they're going to hate it. But as you see, it can really dominate in some pastures, especially pastures where the soils are slightly wet. You're going to see more reed canary grass because it can thrive in those conditions, and it's very palatable, and it yields quite a lot of forage. So I like that plant for grazing as well. Smooth brome grass. Again, as we're looking at these pictures, you take a look at the long ligule in the reed canary grass, the wide leaves, the sod forming characteristics of the reed canary. And then we switch down to, excuse me, the smooth brome grass. And you're going to see a truncated ligule. You're not going to see any auricles. And if you look at the leaf blade, there's a crimping that looks like, I always think of it as a W, but they're calling it a letter M here. But you can look for those signatures as well in the leaves. So we're doing a little sleuthing as we're going through our plant identification. Okay, quack grass. Quack grass you're going to find in pastures as well. It's you're not going to see a lot of it, but you're definitely going to find it here and there. Again, I consider it to be a very palatable plant, but you're not going to have a lot there. If it is typically considered a weed, which means that it might be more of an opportunist that is taking advantage of areas to grow. You might find it in your gardens, for example. But it's still, and the one thing that really kind of differentiates or helps you identify the quack grass is if you look at the clasping auricles, how they're kind of like little fingers hanging on to the leaf stem, but they're also, kind of not meeting up right with each other. They're kind of, one's a little bit higher than the other. And again, ligule that, so you're not going to have much of a ligule at all. So as we go through the fine fescues, the bent grass, the vernal grass, where I am in Bethel, I don't see a lot of these varieties in my pastures, but you might find some of these in yours. Not as common as the first ones that we were discussing. So those are most of the forage, the grasses that you're going to find in your pastures. I might not have hit every single one of them. You might find some other grasses that weren't on that list, but there are some great books out there if you want to dive deeper and to find out if there's some other plants that you want to identify on your own. And again, I can share those links with Christy afterwards, and we can, have that somewhere for you guys to access. Now, legumes are an important part of a pasture. I like to make sure that there are some legumes in the pasture, as they provide an important source of protein for the animal's ration. And they're also nitrogen fixers. So they are providing more nitrogen to feed the soil, to feed the plants, to feed the microbes. And we like to have at least 20 to 30% of the sward be in legume. If you have it a little bit more, that's good. But if it gets to be too high, then you can run into metabolic issues or potentially have metabolic issues with your animals, such as bloat or other things like that. But legumes are an important and fantastic thing to have in your pasture mix. So here's white clover, which is you're going to find in most every pasture. And if you've got a pasture that's been typically overgrazed for years, oftentimes the species that are going to predominate in that pasture, if you just gave it the rest that it needed, would be your white clover and your Kentucky bluegrass. That would be like the majority of what's out there, because they can handle heavy grazing, and their root systems can get shallow. It's not going to help them out, but they can withstand those stressors more than other plants can. So they'll be kind of like the last ones out. So white clover in general, though, is a great forage to have in your pasture. It's a great legume, and there are your native white clover species, but there's also some higher producing varieties of white clover that allow for the leaves to get taller and to compete for sunlight for those taller grasses, allowing you to graze your pastures a little bit higher as well. Very palatable plants. You're really just harvesting the leaf and the stem on these plants. So we'll look at some pictures here. So here we are with alfalfa and your red clover, white clover, and your alsike clover. Now, in most pasture mixes, if you were to buy a pasture mix for seeding your pastures, you're going to find combinations of your red clover, white clover, and your alsike, but typically I have never seen alfalfa in the mix. Alfalfa is oftentimes what you're going to find in a hay field, or it'll be something that's been seeded down and it'll last in your hay crop for a number of years, but it doesn't survive, from my experience, a grazing system. Though I've seen plenty of farmers that seed something down for with alfalfa in it for a hay crop that ultimately becomes a pasture. It's a high quality feed, a great source of protein. It just doesn't thrive in a management intensive grazing situation. But your red clover and your white clover and your alsike clover do well in these conditions. The red clover has a slightly taller stem. It competes more in a grazing system where you're grazing your pastures at more like 12 to 16 inches, versus the white clover you're going to find a larger abundance of if you're grazing your pastures at more like 6 to 8 inches for your pre-grazing height. So here you're going to see how the stolon on a clover plant is like an above ground root system that allows the plant to just creep and travel all over your pastures. Then you got the leaf and the stem that are just reaching up to capture some solar energy and turn the plant back into food source for your livestock. But you can see that you can really fill a pasture with some good clover if you give it a chance, but it really needs to have access to that sunlight. So that gets down to how we're grazing our pastures as well. But that's a whole other topic. So one more page, I think, of our legumes. All right, bird's foot trefoil, sweet clover, black medic, and common vetch. I love bird's foot trefoil. It is oftentimes, it can be a challenge to establish in a pasture, but once it's there, it's a pretty vigorous plant, and it's a great source of protein. It's very palatable. You're not going to see it as populated in a pasture as you will your clovers, but it's a great source of protein and a nitrogen fixer. So you look at the leaves and the blossoms, you're going to, with our clovers, we're going to see more flowers. We're going to see a lot of them in our pastures, even if we're shooting for vegetative growth, just because they bloom so quickly. But it doesn't affect because they're just the stem, mostly the stem and the leaf of these plants. The plants are still very tender and easy to graze and very digestible. So vetch is also a great plant to have in your pastures, though they're going to be more commonly seen in hay fields. I don't see a lot of vetch taking over a pasture. Again, your clovers are going to dominate as far as the legumes go, but the vetch is a very palatable plant as well. It's one of my favorites. Again, I really wish we were outside looking at these plants together. It's so much easier to get to know them that way. But so now we get into pasture weeds and desirable forbs. So a weed is just an undesirable plant. So that's why it's kind of, I hate to call things weeds if they haven't earned the name, but anything that's not a grass or a legume is a forb. So we're going to look at some of the plants that we want to see in our pasture and others that we might not want to see in our pasture. And some of this is going to depend on the kind of livestock that you are grazing and what your goals are for the quality feed that they're going to be harvesting. And sometimes these forbs are helping out with renovating a pasture, bringing it back to an area, to productivity, or making, developing deeper root systems and building organic matter in the soil profile. So let's see what we've got here. One of my favorite plants is the dandelion, and they are some of the favorite, our cows, that's one of their favorite plants to eat in the spring. So dandelions are, I mean, good for us to eat as well. There's a lot you can do with the leaf and the blossom or the root. They're all very edible, and they all provide a lot of nutrition for us or for the cows. But they have a nice deep taproot, which is really great in breaking any, hard pan or, concentrated soil that needs to be fluffed up a bit. When we've got those nice deep taproots, we can draw minerals up from deep below. They also allow for passageways for air and water to percolate through and to be held instead of being washed away as runoff. But dandelions are a great plant to have in your pasture or in your lawns. It's a great plant all the way around. So here is some pictures of a nice snapshot of about 16 different plants that we can look at. So the first one I'm seeing here is smooth bedstraw. Now, I have a lot of bedstraw in my pasture, and it's definitely something that I'd love to not have in my pasture. Though, when it's still in a vegetative stage, as you're seeing in the picture, it's very palatable. Our animals will eat it. It's easy to bite off. It's got a lot of nutrition. It's when it goes to seed and it becomes kind of a net of just thatch. It can really shade out a lot of area where the potential of having other plants could be there, and it loses its palatability. It's definitely not a very desirable plant to have in your hay fields, for example. Definitely something that most farmers don't enjoy. But like I said, when it's vegetative, it's very palatable and very nutritious for our livestock to graze. So it's just taking advantage of it when you get it at a young stage. And with good management and good grazing, you can reduce the amount of bed straw in your pasture. Part of that will be addressing your soil needs. There might be some deficiencies going on that allow the bed straw to thrive and push out other potential plants, such as your grasses and your legumes. The next picture is Buttercup. And we find Buttercup in our pastures if we have wet areas. I've seen Buttercup really abundant this year. So some years it's abundant, some years you don't notice it as much. It's not a plant that most animals are going to want to graze. It's got a little bit of a bitter or a biting kind of taste to it. So they're more than likely going to graze around it and maybe eat a little bit of it, but it's nothing that is going to get your animals sick, but it's definitely something that they're going to prefer not to graze. So it uses a lot of real estate in your pasture. It's hard to get rid of. I think the best methodology for reducing buttercup populations is clipping after your animals have grazed. They do thrive in wet areas, so sometimes you have some pastures that are wet and there's going to be a lot of them there. It's hard to do a lot of clipping on wet areas. So sometimes there's not a lot you can do to manage those plants. And like I said, there's good years and there's bad years. Years when you have a lot of them and years when you don't have much at all. Your plantain, I consider that kind of a transition crop. If you've got a pasture that's been kind of overgrazed and your root systems have gotten really shallow, you're going to see plantain come in to kind of fill in the gaps. There's nothing wrong with it. It just spreads itself out kind of flat. It's very palatable. It's actually got incredible medicinal properties, and it's good for us to eat as well. It just doesn't, if we're looking at optimum forage yield in a pasture, plantain is not going to give you a lot of yield. It's got some heavy leaf, but it stays low to the ground, and then it kind of spreads itself out. So all of a sudden some of your vertical growing forages that would give you more volume don't have an opportunity. But that being said, it tastes good. Animals will eat it. There aren't any toxins in it. So it's okay to have in your pasture, but it's like I said, it's when you're making improvements with your pasture, you're going to see that species get replaced by your grasses and your legumes over time, or hopefully your dandelions. So the Buckhorn Plantain is just another type of plantain. You have your broadleaf and your narrowleaf plantain, and again, it's something that my animals will eat readily. It just doesn't give you the volume of the feed that you would normally want if you're wanting a really healthy pasture. Canada thistle. I wonder if anybody here has Canada thistle in their pastures. It's a pain in the butt. It spreads through rhizomes. It can also spread from seed, but if you see one Canada thistle, you're going to see a young Canada thistles surrounding it. And I find those oftentimes in pastures that are overgrazed or undergrazed, where there's been a lot of animal impact, but so let's say the animals have too much space in their pasture and they're all of a sudden just grazing what they like and leaving the rest behind, and the Canada thistle all of a sudden has all sorts of room to grow and thrive. So if on a well-managed pasture that's rotationally grazed with adequate rest, I don't see much of the thistle there. If you do have some in your pasture, the best way to stay on top of it in the beginning is to clip, to go through, graze your pasture, followed by a clipping. It takes a while to exhaust the root systems on these things, but the more they get clipped and out of the way and allow your forages to grow where they are, then your animals can do the rest by grazing the plants. But the clipping your thistle plants, if you really want to get rid of it, you might be clipping them 3 or 4 times in a growing season just to drain all the energy that they've stored in their root systems. They could have quite a bank account. But it is possible to cut that population back so that it's not an issue. Our chicory, I love this plant. It's got a really nice deep taproot. It can really contribute to our pastures. It's very edible, palatable for our livestock. There's even certain pasture-based chicory varieties that have been out there for years. And it's a great thing to add to your pasture mix. You're trying to graze it before it goes to the flowering stage, but if you've got a chicory plant here and there, taking advantage of it in your pasture so that its taproot is actually creating more opportunity and allowing your organic matter to go deeper into the soil and more biological life down there, then I think it's something worth keeping in the pasture. Curly dock also has a wonderful taproot, but it's a plant that my animals don't like to eat. So it uses up a lot of valuable real estate for my animals. Now I'm going to find curly dock in areas like, say, a barnyard or a sacrifice pasture where a lot of nutrients have been left behind and maybe a lot of hoof action and some bare soil. They love areas that are high in nutrients, but they do take up a lot of space. So I usually manage that by clipping after grazing and by allowing for my pastures to have the rest and recovery that they need, and not turning those areas into sacrifice areas. A sacrifice area is kind of like a turnout yard. Maybe once in a while, or every given year, we might have an area where we just need the animals to get outside. There isn't anything for them to graze, but they're going to leave a lot of nutrients behind. There's going to be a lot of hoof impact and compaction, and these plants can really thrive in those conditions. So we're going to find them. They're not that hard to get rid of. They oftentimes don't populate pastures all over the place. And like I said, clipping following a grazing, they're going to, over time, their population's going to go down. there's the dandelion again. I've got no problem with that plant. It's a forb that I consider necessary. Our goldenrod, that's an really, you're going to find it in a lot of pastures where it's been under or overgrazed, and they're beautiful to look at. I think the animals will eat it when it's vegetative, but it's not a plant that I worry about too much with good grazing management or clipping following. I try to clip most of my pastures at least once every year to just kind of level the playing field and allow for anything that has gone to seed and gotten mature to provide some more vegetative growth for my animals to graze again. So I don't have issues with goldenrod coming into my pastures. So if you do have that, then I would say, a clipping that season is going to, and then a good management system of grazing after that is going to keep that in check. Dogbane is when it gets established somewhere in a pasture, I find that it's really hard to manage, and it does have some toxicity to it. So you don't want it to be the only plant that your animals can graze in a pasture. So if I have it in some of my pastures, I try to make sure that there's plenty of feed for my animals beyond where the dogbane is, and they'll graze around it and get their daily needs met. But if they're hungry and they're forced to eat some of that plant, then I would be concerned about some toxicity and some symptoms. So that's a plant that I'm not really sure how to get rid of. That's a conundrum for me. So hopefully you don't have issues with that. And if you do and find out how to get rid of it, please let me know. Horse nettle is also a plant that I really don't enjoy, though I only find it in a couple select areas in my pastures, and clipping is a great way of managing that plant. But if anybody's got horse nettle or knows it, it's got spikes on the stem, on the back of the leaves, it's everywhere. And this time of year is when it's flowering, and but it's manageable. I rarely see it in areas, and when I do, it's relatively easy to manage through clipping. Now, your common milkweed, I really love monarch butterflies, so I don't worry about milkweed that much. If my animals graze a little bit of the leaves here and there, that's fine. They're most often going to leave the milkweed standing, and in some of my pastures where I might have some here and there, I don't mind letting them stay behind. It's not taking up a lot of space, and I'm giving some habitat for the monarch butterflies. But if you've got a huge swath, I've been to some pastures where it's just a field of milkweed, and you could set that aside and just give it to the butterflies, or you could clip it, and clipping will help manage and bring that population down. And then you put into place a good management intensive grazing system, and you're not going to have a problem with milkweed coming into your pastures. Spurge, I don't have much experience with spurges, so it's not a concern. And with white campion, again, that's something that I would see on the edge of hay fields and on the edge of pastures, but it doesn't cause an issue with my rotational grazing system. I really don't see that much. If you do, again, having a good intensive grazing system and occasional clipping here and there, the white campion will be managed. It's not that palatable. I think our cows will graze it, but it's very much on the bottom of the list of desirables to eat. And your yellow nutsedge is a plant that I find in wet areas, and the leaves are very coarse. They're very difficult for any animal to graze. And if it's in a wet area, it's oftentimes too wet to graze anyway. So you might have some strips of wet land that run through a pasture, and you might find some nutsedge plants, but that's almost, I kind of consider that a part of the acreage that I'm just not going to get a lot of yield off of. It's kind of, you're letting it go to a wetland area. So I don't see that in pastures unless it's wet. Not much of a concern. It's not going to go crazy and spread unless the conditions are warranting it. And oftentimes it's too wet to be grazing there anyway. Horsetail, that would be, if you have a lot of horsetail in your pasture, it's definitely a sign that your soils are deficient in some nutrients or that there's compaction. You're going to find horsetail oftentimes along roadsides. They can survive in the most challenging conditions. So if that's in your pasture, it's definitely worth taking a soil sample and sending that off and finding out what's going on to address whatever excesses or deficiencies are happening. Let's see. Yellow rattle is a plant that I don't have much in my pasture. It's not necessarily a concern for me. I don't have a lot of experience with it. It is an annual. And St. John's wort, I think it's a good healing plant. I don't find that in my pastures. If you do, I wouldn't imagine it would be in high concentrations. So not necessarily something I would be concerned about. As well as with the spotted knapweed, you know, some of these, if we are in a pasture and you're seeing a lot of yellow rattle or spotted knapweed or oldfield cinquefoil, or your smooth bed straw, those are all, and not a lot of grasses and clovers, those are indicators of marginal soil conditions or gravelly soil, a lack of, not a lot of moisture for pasture plants to thrive. So these plants can handle harsher conditions, and they can kind of take over a pasture. And this is where having a soil test done and finding out what are the deficiencies, what are the excesses, what's my calcium, magnesium ratio in my soil, do I need more lime to be added to make things more biologically active, you know, all those things. These are indicators of some attention is definitely needed. Next page, I think we have one more of common pasture weeds. So let's see, the red sorrel, kind of a tender plant. It's got some palatability. I don't see it a lot in pastures unless, again, we have marginal conditions. The burdock plant is a great plant. It's a biennial. It's actually very palatable and something that my livestock love to eat. But, you know, if you've got fiber animals, you're probably going to try to keep this out of your pasture because in its second year of growth, it's going to create these burrs that can attach to the fleece and really wreak some havoc. So burdocks are, they tend to thrive in areas of high nutrients, like the edge of a manure pile or a manure pit, or an area that where animals outwintered, and it's just, you know, there's high concentrations of manure and nutrients. The burdocks are, they thrive there. They can also live in marginal conditions, but when you see a lot of burdock, that can be managed by clipping, or if you have a huge batch, I would take it up roots and all. And the roots are really good for you. So burdock's a great plant. I mean, if somebody's got a lot of burdock on their farm, there's got to be markets out there if you tap into it. It's got some very good herbal properties, medicinal properties for us. Wild carrot, you're going to find on the edges of your pastures a lot. If you've got some tired pasture, you might find it throughout your pasture. And that's another indicator plant of needing, of being nutrient deficient. These plants can survive under harsher conditions. But you're usually going to find them on the edges of hay fields. I don't necessarily find them in a productive pasture field. Your chervil and your parsnip, I do have, I don't have wild parsnip on our farm, but we do have a lot of chervil. And I got to say, our cows love to graze chervil. They will they'll consume that as long as it's vegetative. That's like in the spring, they're searching out the chervil. And so I'm not that concerned about having chervil in my pastures, provided I'm allowing them to graze it when it's young. When it gets mature and seeds out, then it's too fibrous, it doesn't taste as good, and they're going to walk by it. So then I'm going to clip it. I'm going to do my clipping. I can only imagine that the same, well, with wild parsnip, that's got some, if you've got wild parsnip in your pastures, you're probably going to try to eradicate that, because even if the animals are grazing it, it can create some reaction. The juices from the plant create some sort of reaction to sunlight and can kind of burn the skin and even the mouth of your animals if they've got some of that juice on them. So for some it's reactive, for others it's not so bad, but I don't have my animals grazing wild parsnip on our property. I don't see it that much in central Vermont, but I have seen it more in the southern part of the state. And probably if you guys are in Massachusetts, I wouldn't be surprised if you have more of it there. So I'm not sure how to get rid of it, because I haven't had to try to get rid of it. But if you are looking to do that, I would connect with your local extension agent to find out what they recommend. Yarrow, and are there any questions at this point? Has anybody been, if there's any ideas or thoughts or feedback on or personal experiences on any of these plants, I'm definitely open to hearing, and you can share with the group as well. So feel free to unmute yourself or send something through text, and Christy can pass it along.
There's
So
one
as
question.
we go along, let's see.
Oh,
Sure.
So it looks like there's a question that says, can putting chickens in a pasture reduce effect on plantain or other problem plants in pasture? These plants are all non-native. Should we be looking for native plants or not be concerned because the grazers are not native either?
Again, I like plantain. If we have our chickens on pasture, our chickens, if we're movable chicken tractors as we're going along, that chicken manure is going to add a lot of much needed nutrients to your pasture, and they're going to thrive after that. And then what species of plants survive or exist after the chickens have gone through is relative to what was there beforehand, and then how well you're grazing it after they've gone through. So we've got, we built our house on our farm about 18 years ago, and there was just a little layer of topsoil. And what we did to get our grass, our forages growing on our property consisted of outwintering our animals first to build some organic matter and manure. And then broadcasting some pasture mix onto our lawn, but the rest of it happened through having our chicken tractors running for us. So all the manure that those chickens were leaving behind, and clipping if it needed it, or mowing the lawn if we needed to, it perpetuated an environment where the species that can really handle those conditions the most thrive. So we've got a lawn that looks like anybody's lawn, but it's loaded with grasses and clovers and dandelion. But those are the predominant species around our house, and a lot of that I attribute to what our poultry were able to contribute for manure as they were going through and grazing. So there's a lot that we can do with poultry or with any group of animals in a grazing system on our pastures that are going to make tremendous changes to the nutrient load that's in our soil, that's going to grow the plants that are there. And it is going to change. Is it going to get rid of plantain? Well, it's going to make it more inviting for your grasses and your clovers to compete against the plantain. So, and to fill in the spot so that the plantain isn't going to thrive. Plantain's kind of an opportunist in my mind. It's, like I said, though, it's still very palatable, but you're not going to get the yields. So with your nutrient management, by grazing your poultry or moving your cattle and managing them in small paddocks so that the manure is being left behind as they go, you're going to make the pastures plants that you like thrive. And a lot of these weeds or forbs that we're looking at are not going to be able to survive these conditions, because most of them have seed heads or growing points those plants have to get very tall to create their seed head in order to reproduce. And if we're nipping that in the bud, they're not going to be able to finish their life cycle to then pass on, create seed for the next generation. So I don't know if I really answered that question, because it's kind of a, but bottom line, having a mobile poultry system where you're moving your poultry and they're leaving manure, and you're handling them, you're managing it as a grazing system that's intensively managed, yes, you're going to definitely make a difference, and you're going to see more volume on your pastures. You're going to see the species that you do want over time and less of what you don't want. Any other follow-up question or other thoughts, ideas, questions? All right, we'll keep going. Bull thistle, we talked about Canada thistle early on. Canadian thistle is I'll just say that bull thistle is a very fleshy plant. And as Canada thistle, when it grows, it creates its families through its root system. It reproduces through its, I forgot that, it reproduces mostly through its root system, versus the bull thistle. Oftentimes, I don't see many bull thistle plants all in a group. Oftentimes, I'll see them as standalones, or maybe one or two, and they reproduce mostly by seed, and they're not that easy to graze. Though I've seen people train their animals to eat both types of thistles. There's they're palatable. They're just a little spiky, and there's ways to train your animals to eat them. So that's a whole other presentation. But so there's nothing, they're just harder to eat. If you want to get rid of them, I would say, those can be just knocked down individually and stay on top of it, and you're going to be able to manage those populations. Stinging nettle is one of my favorite plants. I harvest it for myself. Once it's great as a tea. It's great in salads. It's a great medicinal, and animals like it too, though it is a bit spiky, so it's not that palatable. And if you see it in your pastures, if it's thriving in your pastures, you're going to be able to manage it through clipping. It loves areas of high nutrients. So if there was a place where there was a manure pile nearby, you're probably going to find some opportunities for stinging nettle to thrive. But it's easy to control through clipping, like I said. Like I've been known to, when we built our house, I didn't have stinging nettle here, so I had to go to a friend's dairy farm and steal some from the side of their barn, or from alongside their barnyard, and they thought I was crazy. But it's a great plant. It's just not great for animals to graze, because it's kind of spiky. It makes you itch a little bit. Your pineapple weed is, again, something you're going to find in nutrient-rich areas where the soil has been disturbed, like a barnyard. You're not going to find it in your pastures per se that have been well managed with a good rotational grazing system. Your common ragweed, again, you're not going to find that in areas where you've got well-established perennial pasture. You're going to find it in areas where the soil's been disturbed, where a lot of nutrients have been left behind. It's kind of like wanting to keep the soil from being bare. It's one of those first species that come in to keep the nutrients from eroding away. So they've got a job, and it's easy to manage these guys as well by establishing the perennial seeds that you want and managing it through grazing and clipping the plants that start to try to mature and go to seed. your black nightshade, again, those plants, as well as the smartweed and the horseweed, those plants I don't see in pastures that much, that have a good grazing system, and an occasional clipping is going to knock those populations back. Oftentimes they're going to show up in times where, you know, the animals have way too much area to graze, and they're selectively grazing and letting certain areas go to maturity. And that's where our weeds have an opportunity to thrive, is because we're giving our animals too much area to graze, and then they focus on only a percentage of their pasture while other things can take off. Your other plants, like your red fescue and your meadow foxtail and your red top, you might find in some pastures that are marginal, that might need a little extra fertility, that you might need to, you know, again, doing a soil test on your pastures every, you know, 3 to 5 years is a really nice way to keep a pulse on what's going on, and if there's any nutrient deficiencies that need to be addressed. But oftentimes with managing plant species, it really comes down to how well you rotate your animals on their pasture. Certain ones that are indicators of poor nutrition, we'll get to that. I'll show you a picture of a healthy pasture and one that's marginal, where we're going to see different plant species that are doing well or poorly. Good. I'm just keeping track of time here. Barnyard grass is another grass that you're going to see in your barnyard. That's how it is an opportunist, that's where the soil's been disturbed, where a lot of nutrients have been left behind. This is a plant that in certain situations, one would say that it should be palatable, but one of the major reasons animals aren't going to graze it is because oftentimes it's found in an area that's so rich in manure that it's not going to have a good flavor or a smell or a taste to it. Instinctively, the animals don't want to eat close to their own manure. So you're going to find barnyard grass in a lot of those conditions. If barnyard grass just growing on an edge of a pasture and it's not knee deep in manure or heavy in nutrients, then it's going to have a different flavor, and I guarantee they would eat it. The same goes for, well, foxtail you're going to find in more, you know, marginal areas of a pasture that has been let go, or maybe that has been managed in a rotational grazing system. There's nothing wrong with foxtail, especially when it's in a vegetative stage. It's much like any other grass. It's going to be tender, it's going to have palatability, but when it gets to the point where it's showing a seed head, then it's very stemmy, like most grasses, and it's going to be hard to graze. But otherwise, it's fine for eating. I wouldn't be worried about it as anything offering any toxicities or anything like that. But once you've got your rotational grazing system established and you've got a good rest for your pastures and your animals are doing a great job with their grazing, you're probably not going to see a lot of foxtail over time. Fall panicum is kind of a creeping grass that you're going to find in your gardens. It kind of lays low to the ground. And again, I don't see that in pastures, really. I'm not concerned about that. If I did, it's something they would eat, unless they're on an area that's like got a lot of nutrient density from like too much manure, or a stock, you know, a winter's worth of manure in that area where you're seeing some plants come up. So I think that's all of our weeds. I know that there's probably others out there, but ultimately, as you can see, there's some that I love, like the yarrow. I don't know if I talked about yarrow, but I don't see yarrow in healthy, well-established pastures. I'm going to find that on the edges of marginal pastures in areas where I think that the conditions aren't as ideal. I might find them on pasture edges, but I don't necessarily find yarrow in a pasture that's giving me a lot of yield and has a lot of grasses and clovers thriving. Yarrow likes marginal conditions. It'll also thrive in high nutrient conditions, but in a perennial pasture setup, I'm going to find that probably in areas where plants are somewhat stressed, and they're going to be able to survive better than their competitors. So you'll see them, but you'll be able to, I mean, and there's nothing wrong with grazing yarrow. It's a nice browse. It's just not going to give you the volume per acre that you're going to be looking for in a good grazing system. So any other questions? Let's see what the next slide has to bring. So there's various ways to interpret what our plants are telling us as far as how healthy is our pasture, how healthy is our soil, what's the quality of the feed that we're producing. And our plants can give us a lot of those indicators based on based on a number of things. One would be the types of plants that are there, but how do those plants look? Are they small and short and going to flower early? Are they stemmy, or are they tall and lush with a deep green color and just looking beautiful and holding a lot of water? Sometimes a plant's going to let us know that it's in a drought situation, or that it's in a nutrient shortage, or that it is just thriving. And so one thing that I look at on my pastures is, if I can, when I graze my animals, I don't bring them back until the plants have fully recovered and are ready to graze again. But on some of my healthier pastures, if I can get 4 or 5 grazings in a season off of that, that is telling me something, versus other pastures where I can only get 1 or 2 grazings and they kind of poop out. So a healthy pasture, your plants can withstand grazing and they're going to bounce back a number of times. So you're going to get some healthy forage yields, much better than something that is marginal. Some of the ways that it can be reflected as well is the density of our pastures. How close are those plants to each other? Are they, can you see a lot of, when you look down into your pastures, do you see a lot of soil, or do you just see plants? Like if you're looking on your lawn, where, you know, I still have some lawn that we mow, and if I look down at it, I hardly see any soil at all. It's just plants. It's just grass and clovers and my dandelions, but there is very little soil surface area for me to see. But in some of my pastures, especially in this year's drought, I can look straight down on my pastures and I can see a lot of bare soil. So those are examples of 2 different types of density. You know, plant density is reflective on how much volume on a per acre basis can we harvest from our pastures. And a low density pasture is going to give you much less feed over the season compared to a high density pasture. Other things you want to look at in interpreting healthy soil is how well our plants are cycling nutrients. So we're looking at signs of activity from when our animals are leaving manure behind. Are there worm castings on the top of the soil? Are you seeing signs of dung beetles trying to turn that manure and bring it down into the soil and store it? Are you seeing the forages that were left behind or trampled? Are they getting brought into? Are they cycling? Are those nutrients being cycled, or is the manure just looking like a manure patty that doesn't change and just gets dried out? So you're looking for signs of activity where the nutrients are being drawn into the soil, where the grass is breaking down and the regrowth is happening rapidly versus not at all. So let me show you, let me see if I have any other pointers to share about that. I usually have a cheat sheet to remind me of some of those other things. I have been a student of holistic management for a number of years, and it's really nice to have different little skills when you're out in your pasture, where you could, for example, do a ring toss, where you toss the ring, and where it lands, you're going to do a lot of assessments of looking at how many different plant species are in that unit area is one thing to look at. How many plants are within that ring? Let's say your ring is like 6 to 8 inches in diameter. You're going to count the total number of plants. You're going to measure the spacing between the plants. You're going to look at any kind of insect activity. You're going to look at worm castings. You're going to look for any signs of biological life, and you're going to take a note of that. And over time, you can check out those same pasture places year after year to see if things are changing. And so that ring toss, you might be tossing it 8 to 10 different places within your pasture that year. And next year, you're going to do the same thing. And you can see how things are evolving, in which direction are you going. Those are great ways to have a pulse on how healthy your pastures are becoming. And by also, when we're looking at the different plant species, those plants are oftentimes indicators of which direction we're going as well. As we were talking about all the different plants, I was showing which ones I like to see in pastures, which ones are indicators for stress or drought or low fertility, etc. So let me see, I think the next picture. So this is a picture of, obviously, this is very dense. There's a lot of growth here. This is all vegetative. It's obviously very palatable. The animals are gonna go through and they're gonna, you can see in the front of the picture, you see some stems right there. This has been grazed by cows. So they grazed it to about 3 or 4 inches from the ground. And it's all lush, digestible, highly nutritious feed. And there's a lot of it there. There's a lot of volume there. So to me, these are healthy plants. This is a dense sward, a dense stand, and it's highly digestible. Not a lot, I don't see but a few seed heads here and there. But it's all very vegetative, leafy feed that the animals are going to do really well on. Cut to the next example, if I can, there we go. And this is a very marginal pasture. So as I look down on this, I'm seeing a lot of that bed straw. I'm seeing some of the plantain. I'm seeing some dandelion. And I'm seeing a lot of thatch, a lot of dead plant material that is shading out any opportunities for other plants to fill in all those gaps. But another thing that could be keeping that from happening is lack of nutrients. There's not enough food for those plants to thrive in these conditions. So it's not just managing this with my livestock and grazing things so that those plants that can handle that kind of grazing are going to come back and do well. But I also need to look at, wow, I bet you this could use some manure. I bet you a good dose of manure on this pasture would really give it a kickstart. Or I should do a soil test and see if I need to add any lime to this pasture or other micro or macronutrients. But this pasture is definitely going to yield a lot less feed than the picture before. And then there's variations, in between these two extremes. So I think that that is the end of my presentation. But like if I were to, I'm going to go back. So we're looking at these plants. They're all still in a vegetative stage, but they're not growing very tall. And it won't be long before the bed straw and the plantain all starts to go to seed because they don't have enough food for them to really thrive and get any taller. So what these plants are going to do is their job is to reproduce. So they're going to go to seed soon. And then those plants are going to be even more palatable. But that's a sign. That's when the plants are telling us that the growing conditions here are not ideal due to maybe the low organic matter or the gravelly soil or a number of factors that are making it hard there might not be enough water there. There might not be enough organic matter to hold the water. There might not be enough nutrients to help the plants grow so that they can build the organic matter that pasture needs. So there's a lot of factors here that we would need to look into and learn more about in order to figure out how to make this pasture more productive. And I know this pasture, and I know that's a lot better now than when I took this picture about 10 years ago. So it's moving in the right direction through a good rotational grazing system, through the animals leaving their manure behind, through an application of lime, and a number of other factors as well. But this soil is a very gravelly soil, so it's not going to bounce back as quickly as others. But this is a great example of a pasture where we need to look at the plants. We need to do some sleuthing on our own with a good soil test, and then we need to take some action. And if we go back again to this pasture picture, this crop has got everything going for it. A seeding of, I believe it's oats and forage radish and peas that followed a new seeding. And so I think the conditions in the soil, the moisture conditions, the growing conditions were all ideal, and the volume here is going to go a lot farther than what the previous picture was going to allow. And the nutrients here are going to grow some really, really nice animals. So there's plenty of pastures that are in between those two extremes, similar to like some of the first pictures in my slideshow with the animals grazing. That's kind of more of your average look. But again, I wish that we were doing this in person out on pasture, where we could be looking at these plants and picking them up with our hands and turning them around, and then looking at the environment and putting our hands in the soil and seeing how much moisture is there, looking at manure. I really like to take apart a manure patty when I'm out in the pasture with my animals, just to see what kind of insect activity is happening. I also like to look for signs of birds. You know, are there enough birds in the area that are actively coming down and tearing apart those manure pies, so that, again, the parasites are being managed, nutrients are cycling a little more quickly, and are again going down to feed the plants. So I wish we were here to do this in person so that we could have more dialogue. But I'm going to open this up now for any remaining questions. I think we have another 9 minutes before our talk is done. And I'm going to end it with my email and our website and my cell phone number. If you want to text me with any follow-up questions, I'd be happy to help you out. So thank you, everybody, for being part of this virtual world that we're in today. And any last questions?
You do have a couple there in the chat. Would you like me to read them to you, Lisa?
Yeah, that'd be great. So I don't
Okay.
have my chat on, I guess.
Great. So one question, how important is full sun to pasture? And can you have a thriving, healthy pasture in partial shade?
Full sun is, if you've got partial shade, you're going to have less forage growing there, but it's also, shade is a nice thing to offer our animals in some of our pastures. So you're not going to have the volume of a full sun, but the shade, again, is an important ingredient to have available for our animals, especially on the hot days. So it's so basically you're not going to have the volume in a partial shade that you would have in a full sun. Yeah, as a general rule, I'll say that. This year, when we've had these drought conditions, I think that some of the plants that are in partial shade are probably doing a little better than some of the plants that are in areas where they've had so much full sun And depending on how much organic matter those pastures have, I've seen pastures drying out. So fully exposed pastures right now are going to be more challenged than some areas where they have that partial shade. So sometimes it depends.
Great. Yeah, and just a comment that if we were in person, we could have brought our chickens. We could have connected that way too. I think
Absolutely.
we probably all have them.
Yeah.
Another question, how should we determine what type of soil test to take? In Massachusetts, we've heard of a few, like at UMass, and there are others.
Mm-hmm. I would say just pick one. You know, like you can talk to some friends and find out who they like to use and why. But once you decide who you're going to work with to do your soil test, then stick with them, because each soil testing lab uses different procedures to different extraction methods to get the same results. So it's not going to be apples to apples when you're doing one soil, when you're sending your soil to one company versus another. So commit to one and continue to take soil tests every few years to just measure your progress from the same soil testing lab. I know I'm not familiar with UMass's soil testing lab, but I know that the UVM soil testing lab has a good reputation. I also am a member of the Bionutrient Food Association, and I've gotten hooked on using Logan Labs. I like the way that they interpret my soil tests, so that's who I use. But I think that, you know, you talk to your extension agent, talk to your fellow farmers, find out who they use and why, and then pick one and just stick to it, so that you're going to be able to plot your progress on a map from that same lab. Yeah.
Good advice. Yeah, I just put a link in the chat also that at 7 o'clock there's a live Q&A session with the NOFA Mass Soil Tech team. So they interpret soil tests for a living. So everyone's welcome there to ask questions, and they know a lot about soil tests.
Great.
A couple more questions. Do you interseed or no-till drill to add more nutritious grasses?
I do. I broadcast in the spring a frost seeding of clovers and grasses on certain areas when I can. Our farm is really small and hilly, and so if I had a no-till drill, if I had the opportunity to do that, I would, but I don't. So what I'll do is I'll broadcast. Clovers are a great thing for frost seeding in probably late March, early April, when the ground is still kind of going through the freeze and thaw, but the snow is kind of leaving the ground, so you don't have to worry about the seeds traveling with the melt. The seeds are nice and tiny, and they fall right in, and they'll get incorporated, and it's a great way to establish some extra clovers in your pastures. But I've had the same. This spring I have a couple pastures that we're renovating, and I got it just right in the wet months of March. I did some winter frost seeding there, and that worked out okay. If I had a no-till drill, I would do it. That would be my first choice. But that yeah, that's what I do. And when we graze our pigs, so our pigs are literally turning over areas in areas that was wood that we're turning back into meadows. So they'll really churn up some soil, and I'll follow them, and I'll broadcast some oats and peas. And buckwheat are my favorite ones to do, and that gets some green on top of the bare soil, but it also gives something for my animals to graze. Or if the pigs go back through again, they'll have something to graze there as well. And with that, what I'm planning on doing is if we get some more rain, is by late August or I hope to do a little more perennial broadcasting of some seeds to get them established before winter on a couple spots.
Great. So you're you're planning to follow the pigs in late October, did you say, November?
Yeah, well, what I've done so far is with my annuals, I'm putting it on now, but with my perennial seed, I'm gonna put that down in late August, timing it around some rainfall so that those seeds can get established. And then I'm not gonna graze that until the following year. So,
Gotcha.
yeah.
Thanks. Any other last minute questions? Okay, I've got a few just closing announcements. I put a few links in the chat. Thank you so much, Lisa, for your time and really educational presentation. I did share your email that you have on the screen there in the chat if you will want to copy and paste it and send you all their questions.
Okay.
Looks like people are sending their appreciation and learned a lot. Thanks to all our NOFA members and definitely to our attendees and presenters. Thanks you again, Lisa.
Goodbye, everybody. Thanks for being here.
Bye.